A very good morning to all of you. Today, I would like to speak on the topic high-level languages. A high-level language, simply put, is a programming language. But what are programming languages? A programming language is an artificial language that can be used to control the behavior of a machine, particularly those which are computerized. And these programming languages can be further classified into three major categories. Machine languages, a basic language which is understood by the hardware of the computer quite easily, but at the same time, just a bunch of zeros and ones. Assembly languages, a low-level language which actually helps humans in understanding a computer language or computer hardware, but not quite user-friendly. And finally, the lifesaver of many programmers, high-level language, which is a programming language that enables the development of a software or a program in a way more user-friendly programming context and is often independent of the computer's hardware architecture and focuses more on the programming logic than the underlying hardware components. Now a question may arise as to why we can't use languages such as English or Sinhala or Tamil or German or any other spoken languages to write a program, and why do we need a specific programming language? Well, the answer is simple. A normal language which we use in day-to-day life to speak often would vary in context, dialect, and vary from region to region. A computer cannot understand or differentiate between such a wide variety. Thus, spoken languages are much more complex for a computer to understand. Therefore, these programming languages actually simple it down for the computer to understand and also at the same time allow humans to understand it as well. Now, let me take you a little back in time. In the early days, there had been a lack of portability between different computers, meaning there couldn't be data transferred easily from one computer to another. And that was when, during approximately the mid of 1950s, the algorithmic procedural language came into use. These languages had to be translated into machine codes using programs such as compilers or interpreters. And that was when the first high-level language formed, Fortran, the first high-level language developed for scientific and engineering applications. Following that, COBOL was the first language invented for commercial purposes and surprisingly is still in use. But what about programming for personal computers? BASIC was intended to be used as a teaching tool for undergraduates, but later on it became a primary language used to program personal computers. Now what about doing maths? Pascal was the first successful language which was coded into a mechanical calculator. And in the current days, C++ is the most widely used general purpose language, whereas Java is much more object-oriented. Yet the ones which I have mentioned above are not the only high-level languages. Python, C#, Visual Basic, JavaScript are also other examples of high-level languages which are common in use today. But what is the major difference between high-level languages and low-level languages? Why are high-level languages much more preferred to low-level languages? Well, let us look at that on various parameters. Firstly, looking at the maintenance. A high-level language has simple and comprehensive maintenance technique, whereas a low-level language is quite complex to maintain. A high-level language is more commonly used in today's world, whereas low-level languages, not so. But when it comes with the speed of execution, a low-level language, since it's much more closer to the computer's hardware, is actually high in speed, whereas high-level languages are much more slower and takes a bit of time. High-level languages also allow a higher abstraction compared to low-level languages which allow only a very little abstraction or no abstraction at all. An abstraction is a process of picking data from a bigger pool in order to present the user only the relevant features of a particular item. And it helps in reduction of programming labor and complexity. And one of the most crucial ideas of object-oriented programming. Also, a programmer of high-level language does not need to have a wide and deep knowledge in the hardware of the computer, whereas a low-level language programmer might actually need a prerequisite knowledge on the hardware in order to write a very feasible program. But when it comes to facilities provided by a high-level language and the ease of modification, low-level language actually triumphs over the high-level languages, because a high-level language do not provide various facilities at hardware level, but a low-level language actually does, because it is much more closer to hardware and helps in writing various programs at hardware level. And a high-level language, though is more user-friendly for a programmer, is actually very difficult to modify if a single mistake occurs. This is because every single statement in it may be executed as a bunch of instructions, whereas a process of modifying programs is very easy in low-level languages. And here it directly maps these statements into processor instructions. Therefore, it is easy to spot the mistake and actually modify it. But like every other thing, high-level language has its own sets of advantages and disadvantages. A high-level language is actually user-friendly, uses English and well-known vocabularies and symbols, easier to learn, and more problem-oriented than machine-based, and can be developed to run in any computer text. But at the same time, this high-level language has disadvantages which make it actually slower than low-level language programs. And also they are generally less memory efficient, cannot directly communicate with the hardware, and will often require a middle person such as interpreters or compilers to communicate and translate the source to machine code. And these interpreters and compilers at times are the ones which actually cause the delay in translating the source to machine code. Even though high-level languages have these disadvantages and are actually slow compared to low-level languages, in today's world, for the increasing amount of problems which have to be solved within minutes of seconds, and for the increasing amounts of programs which are to be written, a high-level language is much more user-friendly to be used. Thank you.